Welcome to the Pro Climber podcast. In this episode, I speak to Dan Saunders. Dan has 27 years building experience in the Canterbury region and specialises in high-performance buildings. He's also a certified passive house tradesperson. In this interview, I get some insights from Dan about where is the best place for a homeowner to start when wanting to build an energy-efficient home or renovate an existing one. ProClimber inspires and educates people to create healthy, durable and energy-efficient buildings to live, learn, work and play in. So Dan, just to kick off the interview today, can you think of something that influenced you as a child growing up in Rotorua that would help our audience to get a better understanding of you?
Well, I was born up in Rotorua, of course, and my grandfather, when he came back from the war, Second World War, he was actually in the Long Range Desert Group. This is something I'm really, really proud of, which the Long Range Desert Group was, I think, a precursor to what we know now as the SAS. So they went in behind enemy lines in the Egyptian desert and caused all sorts of havoc. So when he came back, he wanted to buy a farm, but obviously he had to do a lot of planning first and he ended up getting a government allotment of about 100 acres, which was divided up into 4 paddocks. Before that, he got some experience on working on farms and things, but then put into place this developing of this farm into quite a profitable dairy farm, which my father bought out when my grandfather retired. So basically that's what my young life was being brought up on a farm. So it was very, very hands-on. People sort of think farming's pretty, I won't say not technical, but that's quite big ticket task you're doing, but I developed quite an eye for it. The details and stuff like that, which I got, I guess, from my grandfather and my father, which obviously sort of flows on to my business now. So definitely picked up a few things on the farm.
Oh, nice. I remember my cousins grew up on a farm and it always seemed like a pretty awesome sort of a place to grow up.
Yeah, my grandfather actually did an autobiography of his life, which my brothers published for I think it was his 70th birthday. And it's a really, really interesting read of his early life. They had quite the hard start. He left school when he was 13 to work on a farm and doing men's work, basically. So not like it is today. And he just had this, again, this is something that flowed down to me. And I think it's very dominant with the Kiwi attitude anyways, that whole can-do attitude. He came up with a solution to bloat when they had I think it was ragwort on the farm. So he worked out that you can put paraffin in the troughs and that stopped bloat and stuff. Or just stuff he just worked out by himself. So it was pretty cool.
Now, when you'd finished school, you went on to start a building apprenticeship. How did you enjoy that?
Oh, well, so yeah, as early as I can remember, I don't know why, again, it comes from that hands-on thing. I think that I've always wanted to work with my hands and building seemed to be the logical choice for me. So I left school. My big plan was to do my trade, get a building apprenticeship and get qualified and then go into the police force and then do a bit of moonlighting on my days off, which some people do. But I guess life got in the way and I just got right into my building and work just flowed on from there and I just carried on. So never did the police force side of thing, but it was something that I've always wanted to do.
So how did the building apprenticeship meet your expectations? Were there any things that surprised you?
Well, not really. Like I say, it was pretty basic and I don't think it's that much different what it is now. And this is something that I'm quite passionate about is I'd really like to see a development of building science. Back in the day, you learn how to hang a door, you make a saw stool, sharpen your chisels, just the real basics, which is okay. But what I think's lacking, there was some mathematics, with geometry and a bit of tech drawing and stuff like that. But what I think lacked was the building science, condensation control and, what we're doing a lot more of now with airtight layers and things like that, I think is missing. What I would call life skills in the building industry. When you go to school, you don't learn living skill or life skills, really. You can learn algebra and stuff like that, but how often do people use that when they leave school?
I think that's really important, Dan. I was actually chatting to one of my builders who's moving over to work for BCITO as an advisor, and we were discussing ways in which we could possibly help them by introducing the apprentices to some basic building science principles.
Last year, I've been doing a few talks for industry groups and stuff like that, and last year I did one for the Polytech Tutors Hui in Christchurch, where all the tutors were there, and I did some speaking about what we do and how we build our houses and stuff like that. And I ended up going to the R Institute on Ensor's Road in Christchurch and did a blower door test on one of their prefab buildings, which you don't really want to know the result, but there you go. But that's the sort of thing that I'd really like to see moving forward, is it being introduced at that grassroots level.
Now, as you mentioned, the New Zealand Building Apprenticeship doesn't really talk much about high-performance building. What made you start to realise this is the direction you wanted to move in?
Well, my mantra, for want of a better word, is I always look to do better. Now, whether that's my sports or work or whatever I'm doing, I'm always trying to look for the better way of doing things and understand the reason why I'm doing it. So that's always been very important, regardless of what I'm doing, and building was no different. So unfortunately, I can put my name to quite a few building code houses that I've built in the years prior to knowing what I know now. And, there's a saying, you don't know what you don't know, which is very true. And the other worst saying that we have is, that's how we've always done it, and that's not the way I think. So hence why I've evolved into doing what we do.
There's a lot of discussion about the high cost of building in New Zealand at the moment, and we're talking about better building, which often causes some people to get pretty worked up, especially like with the changes to H1. What are your thoughts about how we can balance these two somewhat polar opposite positions?
Well, I guess it comes down to evidence. It's evidence-based, isn't it? With the media, there's a lot of opinions and a lot of statements, but nothing is ever backed up with evidence. So during these few talks that we did, and I saw you at that recent one, and we did talks, and I was referencing a project we were doing down in Geraldine. And when I was talking, I was saying, well, this is how much this house costs to do, the insulated foundation, the insulation in the ceilings and changing windows and stuff like that. So I have an evidence-based answer to some of the questions that people were asking, rather than saying, it costs you, but anywhere between, not just using figures, it could cost you anywhere between 10 and 30%, which is, in my experience, is not correct. I see, maybe a 2.8%, which is in line with what I think brands have done, or MBIE have done, when they were first talking about doing the H1 changes.
So Dan, when a homeowner is wanting to build a home, where would you recommend that they start? Should they approach an architect first, a builder, or a group home builder perhaps? Because obviously this is the biggest investment that most people will make in their life.
Well, I guess it comes down to what their knowledge base is. If they're knowledgeable in energy efficiency and building housing, or wanting to do that, well, then they could start with either an architect or a builder. But if you're inexperienced, because you've got so many things to think about before you even get to that stage, is, do I have land? What's my budget? If I have land, is it flat or is it on a hill? So I think in the first instance, going to a builder with your budget and being open and transparent with your budget. I don't know how many times I've had someone come to me and say, I've got a 45-degree section on the hill and I've got $400,000 to build a house. So it's matching up their expectations with their budget. So a builder will give you a really, really good idea based on experience, again, and evidence of jobs done previously, where they can say, okay, so you've got this type of section and you want to build this house. So this house here costs this much. And this is where that whole square metre rate thing is just a failing conversation in my eyes, is what's your square metre rate? Well, there's so many open-ended questions for that. What's your bench top? What are your windows? What's your cladding? So to me, it doesn't work like that. So, talking to a builder first, I think, is the best step.
Traditionally in New Zealand, we build using timber frames, but there are so many new options now. We've got SIP panel construction, we've got ICF, they might want to replace timber frame with steel framing, all sorts of different things. Now, where do people start doing their research about this?
Well, I guess going back to what your thought process is around sustainability, what you want to live in. There's a lot of things like off-gassing and toxic chemicals. So I think it's the International Future Building. I think they've got like a red list to clear, or a declare, where they've basically got a whole lot of list of things where, it's highly recommended that you shouldn't be using within your building, because, again, the toxicity levels in your house can go up, and you can monitor that by, there's all sorts of different types of monitors you can have that measure CO2 and VOCs and stuff like that. But I think being very, very aware of what you're doing, garbage in, garbage out when you're talking about, I'll go off on a little bit of a tangent, when you talk about what you're eating and your food. There's so many things that if you can't recognise the food for what it is, should you be putting it in your mouth? Same thing with a house is, what's it made up of? What's the longevity? What's the end of life? Can it be recycled? So there's a whole lot of things to think about, really.
Now we're starting to see more steel frame construction entering into the residential sector now. And this is obviously a massive thermal bridge through the insulation layer. External insulation is the obvious solution to this, but it can prove to be a bit more costly. I believe that you've found another way to overcome this issue.
Well, that was a very exciting project. It was a collaboration with a whole group of people wanting to obviously build better. So with anything when you're designing, especially with steel and aluminium being one of the best thermal bridges, you need to create that barrier to stop the cold in coming in, and then obviously condensation happening and stuff like that. So what we did was we had our 90mm steel frame. On the outside, we put a 75 by 50 cavity batten at, I think it was 480 centres, because we had vertical cedar cladding going on. So that was screw fixed to the steel frame, obviously separated with a DPC or a membrane. And then in between that, we put a cavity insulation that ran perpendicular to the framework, and then obviously built up our building wrap, and then the cladding went on top of that. So we do that on the internal side of the walls now. So even that was in 2010 or 11, I think we did that job. So quite a number of years ago now, but even things we did in that job, I wouldn't do quite the same again, because we've learnt and thinking, I think we could do a little bit better. So definitely got rid of that thermal bridging by that. And then within the steel framing, we had 2 layers of insulation. One was a rigid barrier. It was mammoth, a rigid segment. And then we put the surfaces in, and then we put a sort of a bit of a more of a lofted insulation before we lined it on the inside. Those projects weren't airtight. We weren't sort of doing that at that stage. But again, if I had my time again, I'd do it, done it totally different. But to get over that whole thermal bridging, then that was a really good example of that.
So we've seen some changes with windows moving away from standard aluminium to thermally broken aluminium. Now, can you give us a little bit of information about how the importance is of the position of those windows in the frame?
So I can give you quite a live example. I went to a house that I built before I knew what I knew now. And a little bit of me was quite ashamed that I built it, but I guess it was, you don't know what you don't know. It was a standard building code house. It had a brick cladding, standard aluminium, double glazed, but the owner was selling it, so they just wanted me to go and have a look and just do some minor touch-ups and stuff like that. But I noticed that the windows were condensating because of the positioning of the windows, or where it was in the cold part of the wall. So all windows, regardless of what they're made of, whether they're timber, aluminium, even the Kiwi with a small thermal break, they should be recessed into the warm part of the wall, which is in line with all the insulation. The benefit of that is obviously you can get, I think it's up to about 20% better performance out of your glass, because if you're having a wall, the wall is more thermally efficient than a window. And what we're doing is we putting a hole in it so we can see outside and let light in and stuff like that. But we need to put the best performing product we can in that hole, plus using the best techniques to make that perform as best we can. So recessing it in, and you can do that with any cladding, whether it's brick. We've done all sorts of claddings. We've done standing seam, colour steel. We've done vertical claddings, horizontal claddings, bricks, plasters. Everything can be recessed. Good thing about it too is that you can eliminate that wands bar, which is obviously another piece of aluminium, which is another thermal bridge on the outside. So if you bring it all in, then it sits on the frame, so it's structurally sound as well. So the first ones are usually a little bit tricky when you're working it out, but once you've done one, then she's all go. It's easy.
So what would you say are some of the most common misconceptions that the public has about high-performance buildings? You often hear people saying, we don't want to live in an airtight building. We want our indoor-outdoor flow, etc. How do you answer those questions?
Oh, the old indoor-outdoor flow. So someone put in a door. Love it. The best way is just getting people's knowledge level up. Because people just get they're on this one-track mind, or they have these blinkers on where they think this is all I can do, or you've got to look at it as a holistic approach. If we go back to the H1 just real briefly, is that they've put in extra layers of insulation up the top and they've changed the windows, which is really, really good. So it's almost double the R value, but they haven't tinkered with where it sits in that warm part of the wall. So they've done a little bit here, but expecting the whole performance of the build to work. It doesn't work like that. You've got to look at it holistically. So having that knowledge level up, and I think the other thing too is getting people to understand the why, the overall cost of, taking your kids to the doctor when they get asthma or colds because you're living in a cold house. The other thing too I think is really important is feeling what it's like in an energy efficient house, whether it's being just energy efficient or full-blown passive house. I think that's really important. With the tours that we have every year, when people come in, they understand the reason why when they walk into the house. You've got good ventilation, you've got good heating, or the house is retaining heat easily, and obviously lower energy costs as well. So again, it's a holistic thing.
So tell us a little bit more about the super home tours that are being run in Christchurch.
So if we go back to, that around 2015, and the super home movement was founded then by Bob Burnett. He had a direct relationship with unhealthy houses because of the earthquake. He got tossed out of his house, so his kids developed asthma and stuff like that. So he founded the super home movement, which was it's a charitable trust which is designed about spreading information out there. So the tours we have every year basically allows people to come in, whether it's a mid-build or it's a finished house, especially in winter, because obviously that's when you see the true benefit of it with the heat and the ventilation and stuff. And it just allows people to come through and see houses that are not necessarily a show home that, the general group housing companies have, and they can feel what it's like to be in there, and they can talk to providers and builders and just get a really, really good idea on what's involved and the costs and things like that.
Now, Dan, it's great talking about all these new homes and building them better, but what about the existing stock? I think we've got almost 1 million houses in New Zealand at the moment. What can we do about renovating those existing homes to get better performance?
I think the data is about, of all the houses that we need to retrofit in 2050, say, 80% of them are around already. So to stop this whole cost that's going to happen, all this deep retrofit of the older houses that we're doing now, we need to stop that now by building better. So in 2050, where we don't have to. So obviously some of the houses were built, like our house in particular. We live on a farm, so our houses are built in the 1970s. So it was just before insulation became mandatory or legislated. So our exterior walls are just brick with open, no building wraps and no insulation. So we're just going room by room and insulating and changing the windows and things like that. So there's lots of different ways of doing it. We've got a renovation we're doing at the moment where, again, someone's just done a cosmetic upgrade and then sold the house, but you walk in and you can smell the mold. It's cold. So we're just going in and we're doing it in stages. We were doing the bedroom wing at the moment. We're stripping it right back. We're putting insulation layers. We're putting weather-tight wraps from the inside out so it protects that insulation. And then we're putting airtight layers and service cavities and stuff like that. And, of course, a balanced ventilation system. So we're also changing the aluminium windows that were installed to PVC ones with triple glazing. So
fantastic. Great to hear that there are things that can be done to bring our current building stock up to standard. It's just about finding the right builder, isn't it?
And I think having the builder that, again, wants to learn to do better, this whole, I'll go back, it's how we've always done it. Shouldn't be the mantra we should be using. It's how can we do it better?
Now, if you had a magic wand and were able to change anything about the New Zealand building industry, what would you do, Dan?
Legislation. I would change the building code so it's a more holistic thing. So people have no choice but to build better. Giving people the choice that they'll always potentially go for the low-hanging fruit, and obviously change the way that we think too. I think the average length that Kiwis own a house is 7 years before they decide to sell it. So if we could change the mindset and build houses that we can pass down to generations, so we can, create generational wealth. So you're passing it down from kids to kids, and obviously they're going to get capital gain on that, just as the property values go up, but also you're creating better housing stock. So it's a sort of a twofold thing, I suppose: change legislation and change mindsets.
So just to finish off the interview now, I really like the idea of these super home tours where people can go around and see 4 or 5 different homes in an afternoon to see what's actually happening and what can be done out there. Have you got any ideas how we can actually expand these tours to other cities in New Zealand?
Well, I think if anyone who's listening who's interested is just to get in touch. There's a Superhome, the website, which is www.superhome.co.nz. We've got a list of participants or how you can participate. So there's builders, designers, product suppliers, and all that sort of stuff. So it's a collective group, just idea sharing. So we don't just have one thing that we promote. We're promoting everything. So whether it's passive house or just low energy building and stuff like that. So we try and utilize what we can to build to people's budgets and sites and stuff like that. So there's not a one solution fits all. It's just designed to help people where we can. The good thing about the Superhome tours is I really like talking to other builders. You know, we as a building company, we're not a big company. We've only got 8 guys on the tools, so we can't build all the houses. But what I'd like to do is help other builders be able to do the same thing and, you know, show them how they can talk to their clients and how that benefits the clients by building better, you know, with low energy costs and healthier living inside and stuff like that. So
awesome, Dan. Thank you very much for your time today. Sharing knowledge is at the heart of our strategy to make buildings better for everyone. Sign up for our podcasts to learn more about creating healthy living conditions by protecting building structures from external and internal moisture damage. Thanks for listening. Looking forward to having you with us next time.